I'll call this meeting of the Housing and Community Development Commission to order. We'll start with the consideration of the meeting minutes from our October meeting. Any issues or comments? If not, we could entertain a motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And any against? Okay, we'll move on to number 3, public comments of items not on the agenda. Any public comments? Yeah, come on up. Looks like you'll be sharing Megan's mic here.
I'll just scooch on up. Good evening, everybody. My name is Roger Gedkin. I was here last month. I'm the executive director at Successful Living, and I know we're not on the agenda this month, so which is why I just kind of wanted to say a few words. Last month, you guys kind of discussed our situation with regard to the funds that we have, the $99,010 for down payment funds on 2 potential houses, and you guys gave us a measure to reach, going from 10 vacancies to 7 or fewer, which we did meet and exceed the last measure. So that's, I think, why we're not on the agenda for this month. So that's a success, I feel, in our book. So thank you guys for your, one, frankly, for your participation on this commission. I think it's really valuable and helpful and needed. But also thank you for your experience, your expertise, and your patience as well. I know we're not through all the steps that we need to get through. So right now we're at the point where we don't have the funds retracted, but we're looking forward to meeting the vacancy requirement by the start of next month, and so that we're at or below 10% vacancy rate, and then hopefully we can have the underwriting performed, hopefully, and then we can move forward and utilize the funds. But that's maybe the last step, I hope, and then we can kind of move forward in doing that. But I did want to say thank you guys very much for your understanding and patience and allowing us to hopefully move forward from that. I think that's all I have to say. Thank you all.
Thank you. And I believe, Brianna, you sent out an update to all of us. Yeah. Do we have any other public comments of items not on the agenda? All right, we'll move on to number 4, annual project monitoring presentations. I believe what we have here is an update from Habitat for Humanity.
Yeah, thanks. Congrats, by the way. Thank you. Heath Brewer, Iowa Valley Habitat Executive Director, giving you a little update on our unexpended FY21, FY22 funds. We currently have a project we have a foundation and some walls built, and progress on that for in Barber Place in the Peninsula neighborhood. That is slated to complete in June. Kind of buttoned it up for the winter. It's a big project, a lot to bite off. So going to get that going again when volunteers can ramp back up. The other 3 funds we have, roughly a little over $25,000 for down payment assistance for each. We have 5 homes slated to be built on Indigo, but we will have to be working with some of the design requirements. Sorry, that's me. Design requirements to make sure that they fit the affordable housing model. So working with Homes for Iowa for that project, and we're a contractor for Steve Gordon. So providing affordable housing with our Habitat partners and home buyers, just getting some help with a kind of a cash flowed project through AM management. So it's currently where we're at. Those are, again, slated to be built all this next summer, completed by the fall. So if we can kind of get through some of the hoops of the design, then we should be expending those funds all within this next calendar year. Did you?
We can take questions if you'd like.
Yeah.
Did anyone have any questions?
Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks.
That that's going to happen so quickly.
It is, yeah. And so we were delayed in using funds because of the pandemic, obviously. And then this opportunity was one that we couldn't pass up. And the initial home design did not work within the affordable housing design criteria. So the next round of homes that we will have purchased for next year, we worked with the builder because they're being brought in from Newton. So worked with the builder to get some of those things changed. We'll still have to do a few tweaks, but we're hopeful and excited about those.
Heath, how have your volunteers been since the pandemic? Obviously, you had a lot of interruptions and loss of volunteers. I'm assuming, like many agencies have. Percentage-wise, where would you say you are in terms of returning volunteers?
Well, I would say we've been active throughout in Restore, so that hasn't been terrible for us. But in the home construction areas, we're probably at 40 to 50% of what we would be expecting in a normal year, especially considering groups, and the university is always very helpful. You know, community groups that come out and work on weekends and swing hammers and things. They just haven't been able to have those opportunities. So, and we are reducing the amount of folks that we're allowing on site. Especially, I mean, our homes aren't huge, so you have to really be safe, and we're being careful there. But it has reduced our capacity quite a bit.
All right, any other questions? Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having the meeting just next door to my office. I'll leave that.
So since a couple people have mentioned it, we also wanted to take the opportunity to note that one of our commissioners, Megan Alter, has recently been promoted, I suppose you'd say. And we wanted to thank Megan for her service on the commission, 3+ years, I think. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. And I am both happy, because goodness, I worked for it. I'll say that. But this group is amazing, and the work you guys do, and obviously being part of this for this long, I don't know. Thank you. That's all. Please don't transcribe any of that.
And we'll have the shiny new agenda item in January, I think, of electing a vice chair.
Yep.
That was 4.5. Number 5, overview of aid to agencies, legacy agency request. For a brief bit of context, we discussed at our last meeting a request from CWJ, Center for Worker Justice, to be added to the list of legacy agencies, and the commission expressed desire that Megan and I move quickly to look at how this would work and possibly request funds. And so we met with Erica and Brianna a couple weeks ago, and what came out of that was the idea to have Erica and Brianna give a presentation of the history of aid to agencies, and then to have a discussion to put together to put together a vision for what these sorts of requests should look like, how we should handle them. So I'll turn it over to Erica and Brianna. And I believe those stapled packets that all of you have pertains to this.
Yes, each of the commissioners should have the slides at their spot, just because it's hard to see this screen over here. So this is just kind of an overview of the Aid to Agencies program that we wanted to run through. We have a lot of newer commissioners and people who haven't been through the application process, so I thought it'd be helpful to start here. So Aid to Agencies, you may also hear it called the Human Services or Public Services, kind of all the same thing, but it is intended to provide flexible operational funding for Iowa City nonprofits who provide services to low-income residents based on the funding priorities set in city steps. So you guys typically look at CDBG and home projects. You just did an allocation. Those are for specific projects, whereas this is operational funding that is not eligible through CDBG and home. So this is for staffing, things like staffing. I think it's really desirable by agencies, and I think it's really necessary for them to carry out their other projects. This is primarily funded by the city's general fund, but we also use 15% of our CDBG allocation for this purpose, which ends up to be about 100 or 120,000 annually. That's the maximum that's allowed by CDBG, and we put that towards aid to agency. And our current budget is about 719,000. And so I'm going to go over recent changes. I don't have the whole history of aid to agencies because I haven't been with the city that long, but these are just recent changes in the past couple years, and this is a very abbreviated summary. It was really kind of like a 1 or 2 year process that HCDC went through to make all these changes. And so the first one is that the commission eliminated the high, medium, and low funding priorities that were in the previous city steps, 2016 through 2020. So we previously had like homeless services was high, senior services was medium, and legal services was low. And so the commission had to categorize each agency, but they found that was really difficult because agencies don't fit neatly into a category and they provide a variety of services. So they kind of decided that all the agencies are high priority and put that into the new city steps. The other change, newer agencies were coming into the picture that really couldn't compete with the more established agencies. So HCDC developed the Emerging Agency Program, and they set aside funds for new or emerging nonprofits, and then also defined legacy agencies in our 5-year consolidated plan, City Steps 2025. And then HCDC and agency leaders worked with council to increase the budget substantially for the aid to agency program. So if you look at the spreadsheet that was included in your packet, you can see the increase between FY19 and FY20 that shows that change. And then right now we're looking at a 3% increase in budget annually. Next slide, please. So emerging agencies were developed. It's intended to help agencies grow and develop capacity. Because we have legacy agencies in the con plan and city steps, essentially any nonprofit who's not a legacy is eligible for emerging agency funds. They must, similar to legacy, they must provide services to low-income residents in Iowa City and meet a city steps priority. We set aside 5% of our total aid to agency budget for this purpose. And that's usually around $30,000. Funding can be between $5,000 and $15,000 per agency. And we run the application alongside the CDBG home application annually. And it's a much more simplified application than the legacy application. So applications for emerging agencies will be due this January for funding in the following July. And legacy agencies are a core group of agencies that are identified in our City Steps 2025 Consolidated Plan. You have a list of the agencies in your packet. The number was limited to return the program to its original intent of providing an ongoing stable funding source for those agencies. There's a minimum funding of $15,000. The agencies apply through the United Way joint funding process, which is a pretty extensive application. And we also have questions specific to Iowa City within the application. HCDC reviews these applications and they make a recommendation to council, kind of similar to CDBG and home. And we are accepting applications on a 2-year cycle currently. There are 19 agencies in City Steps 2025, but Housing Trust Fund of Johnson County doesn't currently apply because they receive funding through the city's Affordable Housing Fund for operational costs. And then I just wanted to talk about our City Steps 2025 a little bit. So our current process is to review the legacy agencies every 5 years during the consolidated planning process. So our next timeline to do that would be 2024. So any changes to the consolidated plan right now requires a substantial amendment. And so that looks like a 30-day public comment period. We'd have HCDC review the request and they would make a recommendation to City Council. And so as we discussed at the last meeting, we got a request for an agency to be added as a legacy agency, which kind of triggers that substantial amendment process. The They provided a written request to staff, and I listed, we asked them for a description of services provided, their need for funding, how they meet the priorities and city steps, and then the population that they serve, specifically in Iowa City. And I also have listed here the scoring criteria that we use for the legacy agency applications. It's based on need and priority, impact and delivery, evidence of financial and administrative capacity. And so this is kind of similar to your memo that I provided, but listed some questions we have here. Under what circumstances would an agency be considered for legacy status? You know, if any agency comes along, staff can kind of vet those and know when we want to pass those on to HCDC, or when we would, you know, maybe refer them to another funding source or to emerging agency funds. When will HCDC review requests for legacy status? I would recommend that this be no less or no more than the 2-year application cycle, so no more often than every 2 years when they do the applications. And then any other information that you'd want the agency to provide in the written request. Anything we missed, you can also send questions after you have had a chance to review that request. And then in your memo, I also provided a timeline of the application process and the city budgeting process. So the request, based on those 2 timelines, the request will need to be reviewed before August for them to be eligible in the next application process. And we won't know the city's FY24 budget at that time. So the decision will have to kind of be made without any budget commitments. Any questions on that information?
I have one, at least clarifying question here. Every 5 years, there is a certain window where it would not require a sort of more substantive process to add an agency to the legacy list, right? Isn't that a implication of what you said?
Every 5 years, we rewrite the consolidated plan. We've never done this before because this is the first plan that it's been in. But so we go through a whole public input process. And so we could make the change as we develop the new plan. Mm-hmm. And that goes through HCDC and then the council kind of similarly. So it's not, I guess it's not less of a process, but it's just kind of intertwined into the consolidated planning process.
Okay. I think it should be more frequent than 5 years. And I think it probably makes sense to follow at least a 2-year, because if the funding cycle is 2 years, that's, you know, we have some place in the middle there where we open up a process and do a public notice that, you know, we're going to be considering agencies, and then, you know, have some sort of formal process that's tied to the calendar, which I've read through, just can't quite find at the minute, so. Oh, there it is. That's what I would.
So you're saying that the consolidated plan should be done every 2 years?
No.
Okay.
No, but I think we should be reviewing applications for legacy agencies only in a 2-year cycle. So,
You're just arguing that it should be more often than the 5-year consolidated plan
yeah,
cycle.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, otherwise, I mean, I have other issues that I would look at in terms of the length of time an agency's been, you know, incorporated and operating, because it's closely tied to their ability to succeed long-term. And if we want our money to go to things that are, you know, production, so to speak, or agency output, measured outcomes, then I think we should look at, you know, that. And every 5 years, I think what would happen is it's such a large window of time that, number one, probably none of us are going to have that history from one time to the next, so there won't be a continuity, so to speak. And I think the other thing is it would probably result in maybe agencies who are really not ready to become legacy agencies to apply for it. So I just think it makes sense to me to tie it to that 2-year funding, because we're not going to reopen up the funding cycle. You know, they're going to have to wait. And I think United Way kind of operates like that too, a little bit on its partner agencies. You have a period of time you can become a partner agency, and then you have to wait for funding, so that would be what I'd recommend.
I'd say you pretty well sold me on the 2-year idea. I mean, really, anything longer than 2 years would present the continuity issues, in particular that you're mentioning. Even 3 years would be a problem.
I think so too. Is this open for discussion, this whole thing? Are we
I think so.
talking about it?
Yeah, it's open for discussion, though. I think I might we might start with a little bit more. I mean, essentially, we're answering these 3 questions here. Do we've considered, or we are considering here, the length of the cycle, but we also need to. So we're working on the second question, I suppose, but we also need to do we need to sketch out criteria as well?
I think it makes sense, especially since you, Becky, talked a little bit about, sort of the output and in terms of what an agency is providing. So, I mean, I think that if we were to start delineating that, in my head, I started thinking about, it's kind of like doing time trials in a way. It's like, do you have enough data and enough output and service as a record, perhaps to do some version of actually what legacy agencies have to fill out. As noted in the presentation, it's a much simplified, smaller application with a lower standard to reach that 1,500. Whereas legacy, it's a lot. And I'm not suggesting that it necessarily is that they have to fill out a legacy application, but I think some of the criteria that we might be looking for to say, are you ready to be legacy, we can find in an existing application, right? How many people are you serving? Who are you serving? That type of thing. So that would be my suggestion, is that we would, to find some of the specific criteria about what are the hallmarks that we want, is to actually look at what we're asking legacy agencies to in and of themselves.
Well, that first bullet point for me, under what circumstances would an agency be considered legacy status? I'm going to answer this in 2 ways. And one of it is based on some experience, but years ago in Iowa, I went to Community Foundation Cedar Rapids and heard a presentation about life cycles for organizations. And new organizations, they keep the funding low the first 7 years because there's such a high rate of failure. And that's true. I mean, I could name a couple of organizations that have tried, kind of muddled through for 3 or 4 years and then, said, okay, we can't get this done because they can't get the infrastructure they need. And the funds from the legacy process is not going to give them the infrastructure that they need to get started. So I'm not suggesting that an agency be around for 7 years, but I do think we should have a cutoff or a point at which they should have been in existence for 3 years, 5 years, something, so that we can take a look back at their track record of performance. I think that's one thing. And then the other thing is, and I'm going to talk from personal experience because this happened a number of years ago. A legacy agency came in and totally changed what they, and to tell you the truth, I'm not sure that they had some agencies come in and say, well, we want money for housing, or we've got a youth program, or we've got this, or we've got that. One of the legacy agencies came in and totally changed what they asked for. And it was, what do you call one of those hot topics at the time? Like, what would be one? Like, backpack food, or, those kinds of things were really hot for a while. And so the council approved that agency to get the money. It took away from elder services. The I want to say 15 or $20,000 out of senior Meals on Wheels. And then the next year, the agency didn't apply for it again. To me, that was just like taking that money and tossing it. You know, I mean, we don't have any ongoing program. So I do think we need to take a look a little bit at the legacy agencies too, to make sure that, you know, what is the city, you know, purchasing? You know, I mean, are we purchasing shelter services, food services, youth services, things like that? I think that's important for us to take a look at also. So there's kind of two things rolled up. One has to do with emerging agencies, but another one has to do with legacy agencies.
Well, I think there are like two things I could pull out of that I would want to see listed. One would be how well they meet city priorities, you know, what the service is, and the other would be, which I hadn't really thought about previously, but continuity. I would expect the legacy agency to want to continue to be a legacy agency for years to come. It wouldn't be a
Like
1 or
a
2 year.
consistency of mission, essentially. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just ask, I mean, I feel like this must have been discussed the last time when legacy agencies were created, which was not that long ago. I mean, I see 39 agencies that got whittled down to 19. What were those? I mean, what was the HCDC of 5 years ago? Whoever made that decision, what did they put down as this is what we expect out of a legacy agency? I mean, what were the requirements? What were the circumstances? I mean, I feel like we're not creating a whole new concept. I mean, this has been decided by a previous group or previous staff at some point before,
Well,
right? Am I wrong?
No.
None of us were here.
I think we looked at who was funded over like the past, you know, maybe 5-10 years and consistency of funding. And there was like a clear number of agencies that received funding each year for the past 5 years or something. And we determined that those were the legacy agencies.
But prior to that, it was handled in a different department, well, maybe the same department by an individual. And I still think of her. Linda Severson handled most of it. And I don't know that, you know, what her criteria was, because it didn't, I think she directly gave recommendations to city council.
Okay. I mean, I just see like iCare, Red Cross, MYEP, like we're all organizations that were getting money every year and then it just stopped, which I'm assuming is about the time that maybe the new requirements, I was just curious. I mean,
I think the point at which that list was culled from 39 to 19 was the point at which the legacy agencies were created, right?
Right.
That was
and that was my question, is like when they sat down and said, oh, we're going to make these people, was it just the fact that they had funding for, or was there, I just assumed at some point staff or somebody we have records from them maybe saying this was what was discussed, this was the, I don't know, matrix that was put together on what defined a legacy agency then versus are we trying to just rewrite a book that's already been written is my question.
I don't think there is a book that's been written. That's what I'm trying to say is no.
Okay.
And when agencies were defined as legacy agencies, there weren't 35, 40 agencies. Some of those agencies that dropped off some years ago, lack of services, lack of funding priorities, I think probably direction in Iowa City. But the legacy status only happened, right prior to, I think it was discussed prior to the commission going to the council and asking for more money in 2019. But we weren't considered legacy much before that. That word's a relatively new word.
This is truly only working on memory. I want to say that it was in place, but it had been newly formed when I came on.
Well, you've been
and that
3
was,
years.
yeah. So, I mean, it is relatively recently, but I do know that I wasn't part of, like, these categories existed once I had gotten on.
Right.
So the first year that we had legacies, it was FY20, because that's, you can see on your, at the end of your spreadsheet on the backside, that it's split between legacy and emerging, so that's the first year.
So the only criteria at that time was just if they've had funding 5 years in a row, they're going to be our legacy.
So we kind of came up with a list based on past funding, and we put it in the plan, and then we kind of had everyone review the plan and agree upon it. So yeah, essentially it was based on prior funding.
Okay.
And all these agencies, they do reporting quarterly, and so we look at their reports as well and their accomplishments and outcomes.
So, I mean, is there a problem with using that as a baseline?
Well, unfortunately,
For
due,
looking, I mean,
at least as far as the funding issue, and unfortunately, due to the short-lived nature of emerging agencies, we couldn't put a 5-year requirement. There just hasn't been a.
well, I mean, you can put a 5-year requirement. It would just mean that no one's going to be able to
Well,
apply for
right,
2 more years.
Right. It would just mean we'd have to wait a few more years to start.
I mean, well, and even before they were legacy, they could have still been getting emerging agency aid, right? Even prior to 2020. I mean, there was still money getting sent out.
There was only one lump of funds
Right.
prior to, there was no emerging or legacy. It was all,
Right.
everyone applied for the same funding.
Right. So, I mean, if you were in existence then and you didn't make the legacy cut the first time around, there was no reason you couldn't make the legacy cut 2 years later if you were still applying for emerging aid money and getting that.
I think I asked that last meeting, and you don't have to get emergent agency funds in order to become a legacy agency. And my preference to at least creating some sort of requirement for in existence wouldn't mean that they have had to get funds for 3 years, but they have to have been in business for 3 years, 5 years, whatever, this committee decides. I just think that makes sense so that we are making sure that we're investing our money with an organization that's got some sort of track record of being able to handle it, do the reporting, and use that money wisely. As public stewards of money, I think that's important.
So are we talking about a baseline of an organization needing to be in existence for 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years?
Isn't it now
I mean,
2
someone
years?
said 7 as kind of, someone earlier had mentioned 7 as, as the line where organizations stop being, I guess, cheap and start working as real companies. I don't know if that's true, but I mean,
There's more risk in the first 7 years, but I'm going to tell you something.
So do we make the baseline 7 years and say if you haven't been in existence for 7 years, you can't apply?
The rest of that cycle is that organizations also reinvent themselves every 20 years. So every 20 years of an organization's life, they have some risk because they're reinventing themselves, which could be one of the reasons why you're looking at that list of old agencies who are no longer funded, is that they changed or, those kinds of things.
But we just got to establish a baseline.
Right.
So I'm just asking,
I
is
think
7
so.
years too long for everybody? Is it too short for everybody? I mean,
It's a long time, I think.
What is the current, is that 5 years for any emerging
0
agency?
years.
I'm sorry?
Well, for emerging agencies, there's no requirement at all. Though for transitioning to legacy, I think we simply don't have any current rule.
Oh,
We're trying to come up with one.
I think that this is where actually looking at, like Becky was talking about, sort of track record, who they're serving, whatever metrics it is to say how well are they doing it, right? I think that those are the things that go along with, I mean, I'm mindful of, and I think that this is kind of where you're going, like let's set a baseline, but if we say something where it's like hard and fast of like X amount of years, that doesn't necessarily account for all of the other components that go into the success of an agency.
But we've also heard people say that they don't want us to be subjective.
No, I
So
think we
if
can
if
set a baseline, but I would argue that 7 years is far too
No,
long.
I don't disagree. That was the number that I
Yeah.
repeated.
Yeah, no, I mean,
3 years? I mean, an organization has to be in existence for 3 years and have, just as a baseline before they can even apply. I remember it's 5 years. I mean,
One of the things we could do is say at least 3 years, preferable 5 years, and do a ranking with that, you know, the 5, 10, 15 points, you know, which puts them in a ranking order.
Well, but we're only talking about ranking if we think that we're going to have multiple groups applying at a particular time, right? This isn't what we're talking about, how to rank them as far as who gets money. We're just talking about if you want to become a legacy agency.
Yeah, I mean, what
minimum requirements that you have to even hand in the application over at city staff.
ultimately what we're, and you know, my first impulse is to do exactly what Megan said originally, which is to pull information from the current legacy agency application. The problem being that the key difference between the current legacy application and the decision we're making here is that the legacy application is a rubric that presents a score, and then we have to make a decision, whereas what we're giving here is a hard yes or hard no. But that doesn't mean we have to write it as a set of hard and fast rules. I mean, we don't have to say minimum 5 years. We could say, these are the 12 things we're looking for, and we'd like to see you have most of these, and then ultimately we'll just make a decision, yes or no.
And I'm fine with that, too.
That's an option as well.
Yep. I was just under the impression that part of this discussion was how do we keep the doors from being wide open of just having a bunch of applications suddenly get thrown at our faces. And
by setting
I don't know that I'm concerned about
by
that.
setting our 12 things carefully enough that not every agency in existence will have them.
That would be the hope.
There's that, and then there could also be sort of, you know, contingent on, and I know that this gets into a whole other morass, but it contingent on budget availability, you know, I mean, because that circles all the way back to the question of, we don't want to penalize people for, like all agencies, for welcoming someone who deserves to be a legacy agency into the fold. So this is something that does need to be taken up by council about accounting for it. And I mean, honestly, I made a note because this is not something that council has had to deal with since HDC has not had to deal with it yet, right? So this is something that does need to be thought about on a regular basis, and saying there needs to be something on the side there to be able to allow for those instances when an agency wants to become a legacy and is qualified for it. So I think it does come down to a certain amount of criteria, but I think that there needs to be guardrails or caveats or what have you for the applying agency to understand it's contingent upon you meeting, you know, this is not a checklist, but it is about careful consideration, and then also contingent upon availability of funds in order to be able to be fair to all of the agencies, including the ones that are applying to get in.
Well, it's not only availability of funds, it's a decision about funding.
Yes, I mean,
You know, I'll guarantee you, if they apply to become a legacy agency, they're going to apply for money.
oh yeah.
And I'm not saying that in a demeaning kind of way or anything like that, but that's what I would do. And now if they score high, let's say they score high, you've got a difficulty. We've got a $15,000 minimum baseline of what they have to be given. $15,000 is going to dilute, water down, whatever you want to say, another agency's allocation. And that's where the difficulty comes.
Well, and that's where, and I wasn't very clear, what I was saying is availability, and I don't know how to phrase this, but it really is about availability of council actually providing more money for an agency to be, for the legacy agencies to be expanded, so that that pie is not made, you get this much pie, everybody, aren't you happy, right? So I don't know what the phrasing of it would be, but yeah, it's not just availability of funds, it's the fact that this legacy agency would actually, the budget would go up, essentially.
I guess looking at the spreadsheet, though, I guess I find it interesting that's a concern when you have somebody like HTFJC, Housing Trust Fund, which hasn't asked for any funding in the last 3 years, or hasn't gotten funding in the last 3 years.
They
have a separate,
That's totally different.
Right, but they're still listed on the legacy.
Well, they did get it. They used to get it because it goes back to
Right, no,
FY06.
right. So I guess my question, though, is if they suddenly showed up next year and requested, right, that would also take away money from the other 18 that have been applying the last 3 years. So then the question is, should HT, I mean, if you're only going to look at it as, well, you know, if you put more people into the pool, that everybody gets less people in the pool, well, I mean, right now, that could happen just by Housing Trust, I'm just going to say it, Housing Trust Fund of Johnson County requesting funds they haven't requested for 3 years. They're a legacy agency, they're on the list, right? If they suddenly requested money, they'd get part of the funds that everybody else is already getting anyway. Everybody's pie piece already gets smaller.
So to me, it sounds like you're actually on it's a different way of saying, yes, the budget for HCD, or for the agencies should be larger.
Well, I just don't think that should be I don't think it should be part of the discussion of whether somebody is accepted as a legacy agency.
Okay.
That's my issue. My issue is you are either a qualified agency that deserves funding for your operating expenses because you have shown worth in this city, or you're not. And regardless of what city council could just choose not to give anybody money in 2 years. Like, it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't take away from an agency's value as a provider of services in the city. And I think by making the statement that, well, we're not gonna give you value because it may end up getting less money in another group's pockets that's already getting money. To me, the statement is, if they apply, which is what I thought this discussion was about, right? If they're applying, how do we determine whether they are of value? And if they're of value, it shouldn't matter whether city
But that's not what we're determining. We're determining whether they should be added to a list of legacy agencies, not whether.
But isn't that what that is? Is if they come to us and say we'd like to be a legacy agency? I just, to me, and I've never, I mean, you have a lot more people in here who've run organizations like this. I never have.
I mean, I'm actually really sympathetic with you to a point. And it would be to the point where the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, and ninth applications come in. Like, if you just add one legacy agency to the list, it really wouldn't cut the other agencies' funding very much, even if the city did not add funds. I ran it in my head, it would be like $1,000 or $2,000 per agency if you added one agency to the current list. But if you added like 6, it would really cut into the funding quite a bit. So it's like I'm kind of sympathetic to adding some sort of clause that says that availability of city funds may be a factor in the decision. I don't know if I want to put it in as a requirement.
Right, no, just may be a factor.
But I do want to give the future commission flexibility to consider it.
Well, but back to what Kyle was saying about, for instance, the Housing Trust Fund.
And for the record, I only picked it out because it was the only one that didn't
Right.
have any things in the
That's okay.
spreadsheet for 3 years. So
Does that mean if there's just a blank on the spreadsheet, that means they did not apply, correct? The legacy.
Yes, if there's a 0, they applied. So kind of in some of the previous years, there should be a 0 where they didn't receive funding.
but those are all not legacy agencies.
The blank ones mean they have not applied.
Right, but that's because the Housing Trust Fund is receiving operational
I
funding.
understand. Well, my point is, if they haven't applied, if a legacy agency hasn't applied, and we could just say, if they haven't applied in 3 years for this pot of money, because the trust fund gets money
Right.
Somewhere else.
from another pot,
Yeah.
then you'd have to reapply to be a legacy agency.
Yeah, I didn't want to open that can of worms, but I was
Well,
also
but-
thinking the same
I mean, you
thing.
could say that.
I thought actually something changed there. Didn't they used to get like $25,000 and it changed? It comes through another channel or something?
Yeah, they get it from another pot.
Yeah, and they asked to be,
That's, but I know that they still consider themselves a legacy agency. So another thing is, there've been a lot of agencies or new services pop up because of the pandemic. And I have a real interest in these. Probably one of my first questions when I just met somebody a couple weeks ago at a campaign who said, "Oh, here's my card. I just started a new organization." I said, "What do you do?" And she said, "Oh, a little bit of this and a little bit of that." So, but there's a lot of pandemic money, to help with a little bit of this and a little bit of that, because there were a lot of special kinds of needs that popped up, I think, during, in the past year and a half. So I would want to see mission statement, what their mission statement is, and kind of if we're saying you have to be in existence for 3 years, I'd like to see some historical thing in that 3 years of what did you start doing and what are you doing now? Because I think that there will be some agencies that are going to try and keep going on. And this raises the question of duplication for me. How do we deal with duplicative services? So I think that that's something that we should consider in the application for, and not just another agency is doing it, but maybe the service is provided in some other way. You know, it's just thinking outside the box a little bit and taking a look at how people's needs can get met, not necessarily through agency services, but in some other way.
Well, and these are for operational funds, correct?
Right.
So don't you also have to look at, we're the stewards of the money. Well, we recommend to the council how much money is going to come out, and it's mostly general fund money. So is there value in saying what percentage of the requests that they're asking is their operational budget?
Yeah.
Because, you know, you should not, probably, your operational budget typically would be about 25% of your overall budget. So, you know, that would be one thing I would say. That we have to look at what their budgets are, look at their 990, the most recent 990, and what was their operational cost based on their entire budget.
I agree. I like to look at program and whole entire agency
'Cause
budgets.
It's hard for us to say, I think, as a commissioner, not as a former nonprofit executive, okay? It's hard for us to say which ones are more valuable than the other as far as what their missions are, what they do for the community and for the low-income people in this community. What we need to say is, okay, here's how much money we think we're going to have. And it is going to be difficult, for me anyway, to cut any of the legacy nonprofits that have been around in this community. They're providing services that are still needed to be in this community. I mean, I care was AIDS, correct?
I think so.
So
But I think so.
they probably don't.
That was gone around the time. that
Yeah, I mean,
came, so.
that was because there's not a need like it was 25 years ago. But, I mean, I think we have to decide the money part of it.
Yeah, I
Is there,
Budget is a,
they
is
need
a
the
for sure.
operational funds.
Yeah, I mean,
And where are they getting the other operational funds?
even I remember something, and this was even just an emerging agency, and they were asking for something like $12,000, and it came that it was like basically one person doing it almost entirely on their own with like a half-time person, and it was like, you know, why do you need this much money? Because they had literally just come into existence, and of course, I mean, it makes sense. Everybody's going to ask for the money that they think that they could ask for, right? But the budget didn't. I mean, basically, when we talked to them, I won't say budget because we didn't ask for the budget, but when we spoke with them to find out really what was going on, what were the nuts and bolts, what were they planning on spending on, and it was just sort of like to be able to have it in hopes that they would grow, rather than proving the need of like, we do need this because this is part of our, so I totally agree with you that a budget should be part of that consideration. Just to actually kind of summarize, and I'm sure everybody's got notes, I've been seeing you do it, but the stuff that seems to make sense to me is we've been looking at like minimum years of existence without it being hard and fast. I actually like the 3, preferably 5 or something like that. I mean, to show the track record, right? And some kind of a way to get at that, you know, whether it's that historical, I'm calling it historical narrative, but that's, you know, where did you begin? And to show the consistency of mission, where did you begin? Where have you gone? Mission statement, a consideration of, and this would be something on probably the commission side, is about whether it's duplicative services or not. Are you doing the same thing? Where's your value, essentially, to the community? And there's multiple ways in which the same populations can be served, and actually even with the same service, but perhaps in a different way. But so that would be something to consider. Budget, and I think that's all I had so far. Was there other things that we've talked about?
Past record
so
of
far?
funding from emerging agencies without a requirement, but I think it's something people would want to see.
Or if not that, then, well, yeah, I mean, I was going to say, if not that, where were they getting funding from? But presumably, I don't know.
I had a question, actually, that I went through my papers a dozen times. I can never find what I want when I want it. Houses and homes, are they not in a legacy agency?
Nope.
I didn't see them on the chart.
No.
No, they've received funding once through emerging agencies.
Oh, okay. Were they on the list for emergency agencies?
Yes, they should be.
Yeah.
They are.
Okay. For some reason, I thought that they were part of the legacy project.
No, they're one of those truly unusual, because they're only 3 years old, and they have just exploded in terms of,
Yes, yeah, I agree, but to point out that, to make sure that the service is needed, that they have the capacity, because what I don't want to have happen is an agency to pass around the commission and go straight to the city council because they have a budgetary crisis, because they weren't planning well, because they, or, whatever, they've sought money out, and now we're not going to be getting the service that we should be getting because, there's been some sort of issue with their management or capacity or something like that. So I just think it's, my question isn't with, I thought Houses and Homes was, and they were one that did go around the process. So I just want to make sure that, I thought that they were for a legacy agency because I thought that they had gotten like $25,000 for
No.
this. 15, is that what they got?
No, I have it right here.
as an emerging agency.
5,400 is what they got from emerging aid.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they also did get a direct allocation from council through our like emergency request
Right.
process. That was maybe more like 25,000.
Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, that was the end around was, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't like end rounds, so.
But we can't
Control that. That's,
But we can't say that nobody
Anybody
can go
can
in
do
front
that,
of the
yeah.
council and ask for money.
Oh, I actually, I would take exception to that statement. I do think that council should be directing them. If we have a process for agencies to come in through the front door, I think everybody should, because it's just not fair.
Well-
So,
I agree, but that's not what happened.
I know, but I do believe the council actually said, we don't want to do this anymore. We
Right.
want the
Right.
process for them to go through the appropriate steps, so, which they should.
Well, then, when you talk about duplicative, it's also important, I think, to say, how do you partner with other similar agencies? Because if you have a person, if there's only one service, because you don't want any duplication, and that person, for whatever reason, doesn't like the staff or doesn't want to have services through that particular agency, where do they go? You understand what I'm saying? So you could say, how do you partner with similar agencies? I mean, Center for Worker Justice is an emergency agency, and I don't know this agency, but the Sudanese American Community Services, and I don't know if they're related or anything like that. Because somebody that walks into, and this is nothing against CWJ or either one, but somebody walks into CWJ and doesn't want to get their services from that agency, does CWJ say, okay, maybe you could go, because we have some working relationship with somebody else that's providing similar services?
I think that happens a lot, but those are tough situations to deal with because I just, like you hear about shelter,
Well, you can ask them.
yeah.
It's part of the application.
I think it's helpful to encourage collaboration and partnerships, and coordinated entry is just an excellent example of agencies working together to reduce, and to have a better outcome for clients' needs, that those that need the help, are going to get the help, and that they don't have dozens of application processes to go through. So I think that personally, I'd love to see some collaboration grants come up, where we actually say, here's a pot of money, and 2 or more organizations come forward with a great opportunity to collaborate. I think, because we're going to be forced to water down funding to existing agencies, if all the new starts, come forward and want to become legacy agencies, unless the city allocates more money.
Brianna and Erica. Just a question, I guess, just for confirmation, is in the end, we're not the gatekeepers for this process. I mean, whoever applies, all we are doing is making a recommendation to council on whether an application is approved or not.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we're not going to be in a position where someone comes to us and we just say, no, your application ends here. Right? Or are we going to have, because
I hope so.
I'm just purely questioning what our role will be in the overall picture, right? If we get 3 applications and we as a commission say, these 2 just don't hold muster, we're going to recommend this one forward, is that a recommendation to council to not approve 2 and approve 1, in which case council could still approve all 3? Or will it simply be council will not see the ones we don't think should move forward in the process to them?
So you'll make your recommendation to council in the form of a substantial amendment. So you say, we recommend that this one agency gets added to the legacy list in the consolidated plan. Council is going to see, all the meeting minutes. They're going to be able to read, your discussion. They can go with your recommendation, or they can change it at that point. So they'd be able to do whatever they chose.
I think some of that depends, Kyle, on whether or not an organization goes directly to council. That's would be most likely to, and that has happened.
But if there's 3 applicants and this commission only recommends funding for 1, those other 2 applicants are perfectly capable of going to council and saying, we applied, we want.
Right, and that's my question.
That's what they do.
My question is, how is that recommendation to council being worded? Or if all 3, if we say no to all 3, is council even going to be made aware that we've said no to all 3?
Absolutely.
Is a recommendation going to council saying we recommend that these 3 that have applied all get denied? Or is no recommendation going to council at all? It simply dies here at the commission level. You understand what I'm asking?
I believe that once we start the process, we take it through to council. So we would take it to council and say.
So even our denials are going to move forward to council and say, we make the recommendation that 1 or 0 or none of them get passed. Council still is going to be the one that says, sounds good, HCDC, or says, no.
Asked and answered, Kyle.
Yeah.
In the past,
Yeah, okay.
most of the time, they have taken the recommendations of the council. Even
Of the
if-
commission.
Of the commission. Even if an agency, because I was one of those agencies one time.
I know,
It didn't get
yeah.
anywhere because they basically said, hey, the commission's doing its job, doing the work, and this is what they decided, so.
And ultimately, that's just out of the realm of our control. I mean, if council decides to just start randomly overruling every decision we make, that we can't do anything about that.
What's the purpose of having a commission if the council is going to reject or?
Yeah, I
It was
mean,
just, I'm sorry, it was just a purely technical question on how denials would get put forward. That was my question. So that, yeah. Okay.
Do you have what you need? I mean, we have a list and we have a suggested time frame of 2 years.
I do have a question. I have I think a good list of everything that you guys have mentioned, and it seems like everyone's in agreement with those items. I wanted to ask you if it was required for an agency to be funded through emerging funds first, and if you wanted to have any criteria related to that, or if someone who has never even applied for emerging funds could be eligible for legacy funds, just right off the bat.
Oh, I think they should.
I want to say yes, with the only,
Emerging agency first.
it's like my only reservation being that emerging agencies is only a couple years old, but I mean, I want to say yes to the question. It would be the ideal.
Oh, what, you're saying that they could go right to legacy without being?
Well, I just meant that currently it would be desirable if emerging agencies were 5 or 10 years old, and so we had more of a track record to look back upon. But since we're setting a policy for the longer term future, I think probably yes, there should be a emerging agency history.
I think he's agreeing with you.
Yeah,
It should be through
agreeing.
emerging. It should be through emerging.
I'm agreeing with you, but I'm noting that I think the best argument against it is that emerging agencies itself is so new that maybe there are some deserving organizations that haven't gone through it.
So we're saying a requirement is that they have successfully received at least 1 year of emerging agency funding. Okay, I like that.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah, I'm on board with that.
I think that'd be helpful. We do require reporting for emerging agencies, so if we have that, we could provide that as part of the application too. So I think
More
that
data.
helps with some of your other, questions about, history of services provided and that type of thing. Okay.
Well, this is great. I mean, this is something we should have done a while ago, and we sort of were prompted to do it in an ad hoc kind of way, but I think we're working on it in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it's setting up for, I mean, there's a process that we just didn't need before,
Yeah.
so.
Oh, we needed it. We just didn't know we needed it.
Should have anticipated it, but at least, we're able to get through it in a working session as opposed to several years.
And it means that no future commissioner gets to walk in here and make the joke I make every time we start this application process, which is, when does an emerging agency emerge?
Yeah.
So we have one agency that has indicated that they want to apply, so are we going to have an application process upcoming in the next few months for legacy agencies and put that information out so that others can also apply? Is that what we're doing? Or are we considering CWJ independent of all of this?
My opinion is CWJ put in an application request already, correct? I mean, any rules we make should not be grandfathered back to them I don't know how we handle it. I guess my opinion is they just present and we figure it out, but I just feel like they've already, they opened up the door. Now we're trying to figure out how to
What would
for ourselves in the future, but I don't know.
do we have any existing language at all that was already there? There's just not any?
No. Basically, that one sheet that you have in your packet that has the legacy agencies is almost the full kind of description of it.
Okay.
I don't believe our intention was to have like a application round. It was just those who express interest, we would direct them to this process. And we did get an inquiry from another agency recently, so you may see another one. We'll go through our kind of checklist and see how they compare with your categories, and then they can provide a written request as well. So we don't even have like an application, we just ask them to provide a written request.
See, I was suggesting at the onset that we actually have an application process. And the reason why I don't like considering one at a time is that's exactly what we're doing. And agencies that have bypassed application processes and gone directly to the funding source usually get all the money they want. or all money they request. They're not put through the same type of comparative process. So I would advocate that we have an open door, whether that's every 2 years, we say we are going to be considering their legacy applications for legacy agencies, and then close the door. Otherwise, you know, we could be doing one every single meeting, literally. And I guess I would just advocate that we create a process, a timeline for consideration, and then close that door until it happens the next time again. And that's why I said every 2 years.
Well, if we
Maybe
have
I
a
missed-
requirement that they have to get emerging aid agencies, there's only 5 that we have to worry about in the next year.
And maybe I was misunderstanding. I thought the question was about, specifically about CWJ
Yeah, I thought it was
right
about the
now,
existing
not about, I agree with you that there, I mean, actually moving forward, once there's an application in place, I thought the question was, do we now essentially make CW, like, try and whip together an application and make CWJ go through it, even though they're the ones who, so I thought we were talking about CWJ as opposed to, well, because
They
they
can get money
already.
anyway ahead of, I mean, when's the earliest they can receive funding?
Isn't it FY '24, isn't it?
Yeah, so we can have them, that's, whatever you guys decide, we can have them do. I think they would just need to know, I'm just thinking that the emerging cycle is coming up too, and that they'd probably want to, I guess, we'd have to know how they're gonna, if they want to apply for that, or if we want them to apply for this other, I don't know. I'm just trying to think through it right now.
Well, okay, again, I can't find all the information because it's all over the place. So the next legacy application process is not happening until next fall, correct?
Correct, the applications will be next fall, and then the funding will be, I guess the emerging doesn't matter.
That was my point. I don't think it does matter. I would hope that they would continue to apply for the
Yeah.
emerging funds because they won't be eligible. That application process in August or September, whenever United Way puts it out, those funds aren't until the following year. So you're
Right.
looking at July 1, 24. So up until that point, they'll want to continue. My thing is, it's also, you know, I think I just want to get the word out to whoever, other agencies. And if it's 1 year, I mean, another agency could, you know, at least know that in order to become a legacy agency, I need to get funded through the emerging agency process. I want it to be open and transparent. And I think by, you know, putting a process out and saying the commission will, you know, we have applications for agencies to be considered as legacy agencies for the funding that won't happen until 2023. The funding cycle won't happen then. Why wouldn't we? I mean, it's not going to really matter. CWJ isn't going to get any money before that anyway. I mean, from this process.
Well, there's a timeline in the staff memo on page
I
2,
know.
right?
I looked at that, yeah.
Timing and budget considerations.
Right.
Legacy applications are due, well, it's August or September, it depends on when they get it, you know, when it gets their application process together, but.
That I didn't have any issues or problems with that timeline. I mean, that seemed
No, I
fine.
don't either.
But there's still, I think, the kind of the outstanding issue of whether we want to ask our current applicant to do whatever application process we decide on, whether we want them to show all that information that we're requesting, and then whether we want to have them be the first sort of takers of that entire process, or whether we just want to consider their application as written right now, right? That's the...
Oh, I think we want the information from them.
I think we do too. I mean, I think we're going to assess it using some of that stuff anyway, so we might as well ask them to send it in. I mean,
And then this would still be their timeline, right? Yeah.
and they can, I mean, that seems doable before January, doesn't
Oh,
it?
yeah.
So are you asking us to, like, draft an application for them to fill out based on the criteria, or what? Can you provide some clarity for us?
My sense is that whatever application process comes out of it, the current applicant should be the first to do it.
I didn't hear all of that. I'm sorry.
Whatever application process that comes out of this discussion item, we should ask the current applicant to go through it.
I agree.
Yeah.
It would almost be unfair not to, in the sense that we have all that stuff in mind that we just listed, and so those are the things we'll probably be looking for when we
Then what are we gonna do?
judge them. We should give them an opportunity to send it all in.
So do you want us to, if everyone's in agreement, to have them do that ahead of the January meeting? And then we would make it public?
That would be ideal, as long as it's not too short a timeline.
And it appears that you could just notify those emerging agencies that have received funding in the 3 cycles, that we have this process. Doesn't mean that they're gonna be, become a legacy agency, but I think it's open, it's transparent, it's what we ought to do, to tell you the truth.
Okay, we can do that.
I think that makes sense.
Chair, I'm gonna head out. So, thank you guys so much. Congratulations again.
And happy birthday to your son, I believe it was.
Yeah.
Birthday.
Appreciate it. See, next month,
January.
January. Okay, see everybody in January. Have a great week.
It is hard to leave for evening meetings in the cold, I gotta tell you. So.
I believe that's it, right? That's all the information we need for this. All right, on to number 6. We are looking at the substantial amendment number 1 to the FY22 annual action plan, which was conveniently located on the city website.
Excuse me, I have a question, it probably relates to the last one. Have you and Megan had an opportunity to meet with Jeff Fruin yet?
No, as of now, we've just met with Erica and Brianna, and I think the sense from our discussion was that there would be a much later time when we would put in that request, right? It would be closer to when that year's budget is being discussed.
Yeah, so we haven't even approved the FY23 budget at this time, so we're not even really thinking about FY24 yet. We're in our FY23 budgeting process right now.
Well, I was looking at the budget, so when I was reviewing the budget and when the commission would make decisions, recommendations for funding, would that fall before budget requests go to the city? I think it would for the following year.
Yeah, you'd be making your recommendations prior to the city's budget being approved.
Because previously what's happened is the city comes back to us and says, this is how much money you have, and we have to fund within. So are we suggesting that that's going to be a little bit different, that we will be looking at our process and saying we have 2 new emerging agencies that have now become legacy agencies, and we want more money for the budget? Is that the way it's going to be handled?
So we should have an estimated budget that's not approved, I think.
Okay.
I think that's typically where we're at when we haven't done this in a couple of years, so I'm a little foggy about it, but we should have a staff budget that has not been approved by council.
Okay. I'm sorry. I remembered that from the last meeting, and I just wanted to make sure that we kind of closed the loop on that.
No, and that's something we'll also want to look at, because I think the date was next spring or so when we would want to put in that request.
Yeah. I think it's up to you guys how you want to do it.
Okay.
I provided the timeline and whenever you think it's appropriate.
Okay. I'm just making sure it's next spring because if it were after June, then the next chair would have to work on it, whereas it would be nice to work on it the year of the commission that was discussing the issue.
And we can help facilitate too, so let us know.
So with number 6, we're really just, I mean, we can have a discussion, but ultimately the outcome here is the vote, right?
Yeah, it's really just a formality based on what you recommended last time, just the updates to the actual plan itself.
Right.
So do you need a motion?
I believe we do. We had to make a formal motion here.
Okay. I move we accept the FY22 Annual Action Plan Substantial Amendment.
And I'll second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right. So number 7, we've got the FY23 CDBG Home and Emerging Aid Agencies application materials. If I'm not mistaken, what we have here is a reworking of the current year's rubric. And so we can, suppose we'll do them one at a time. We'll look at the CDBG home first. What we have here is the new.
Yeah, I have both in the packet, so I can put it up however you would like, but we basically tried to take some of the feedback that has been thrown out in the last several meetings and adjust the criteria to hopefully respond to some of that.
If I've got the higher level right, it's the questions are more detailed, have more detailed criteria, and the number of points is standardized at 20 for each question.
I can't find that.
We also changed the weight distribution that was talked about last time to make the sections more even. I think the previous scoring criteria didn't have very even weight per section, so that was adjusted too.
Oh, there it is.
See what thoughts or comments or questions anyone has.
I could see some of my issues incorporated in here because I know during the last round, I think maybe I was on the phone with you.
Yep.
Struggling through some of how I was supposed to do. I think it had to do with the income level. So I appreciate, seeing that in there. So
Now, where are the income levels?
I had one.
Oh, here we go.
I appreciate the more detailed questions and the more detailed criteria for awarding partial points. I also, in a certain sense, I don't even want to comment too much on this because I'm not going to be using this rubric next year, but I appreciated the offer to give staff scores for the couple of very objective type questions. I think that's something I would have found really helpful.
I have a question. This has always bugged me as an applicant. The feasibility as far as the median income of the persons targeted. I've never understood why the city would require applicants, especially for home funds, to be more restrictive than what the home program allows. Let me give you an example. If the Housing Fellowship came in and applied for home funds and said that everybody that they were going to serve that lived in those houses had to be 0 to 30% of the area median income. And we did have, when I was working there, we did have projects that were like that. And we would get a young woman come in to apply, and she would be $2, literally $2 over 30% of the area median income, and the staff would have to say, I'm sorry, you're over income. And she didn't get it. She didn't get it. She's like, I am very low income. And the rule is it has to be under 60%, the HUD rule. So why does the city put more, even more restrictive criteria on that than what's required by HUD? Because if you do 51 to 60%, you only get half the points.
If I'm not mistaken, I think that was just an earlier commission probably just decided it wanted to put extra emphasis on 0 to 30%.
Yeah.
It may have been the wrong decision, but I think that's
It's
why it
definitely,
happened.
in my opinion, the absolute wrong decision.
In number, are you finished on?
Well, I want that changed.
We did adjust the weight. That question used to carry a ton of weight in the scoring criteria. Like if you got the maximum points on that, it really skewed the whole thing.
Yeah.
So we did try to adjust for that to make it more fair,
Well,
if that makes you feel any better.
Me hearing that a $2 difference would cut somebody off from receiving something, because $2 at that level doesn't make anybody stable or can't even buy a loaf of bread for that much money, so that does concern me.
So I mean, there are a couple of questions. I mean, I definitely noticed that. Hopefully, it's not just my mic. I definitely noticed the change in the real estate space here being taken up by the AMI question. I mean, it went from 20 points out of 100 points to 20 points out of, I think, 240, 220, 240, something like that.
320, yep.
300, yeah. So I was worried that might have gone a little bit too far, but I do think it should have been less than 20% of the total application. But then, Marianne, I think the issue you're raising is another one, which is, do we need the fine-grained distinctions within AMI? I mean, is there such a meaningful difference between 0 to 30, 31 to 50, 51 to 60? That seems to be the question you're asking.
No, what
there's
I'm
a-
saying, Matt, is that HUD requires when you, I'm only really familiar with the home money.
Sure,
HUD's requirement is if there's everybody has to be under 80.
right.
If you have so many units, everybody has, 90% have to be under 60, and then, you know, how that all figures out. And the city has always, in my experience, added additional requirements. They've added more than what HUD requires, and they're HUD funds, and so why does, as long as the project meets the home HUD requirements, does the city really care?
I would think that I mean, to me, two things. One is, I can't say where that came from, but I do know previous commissions, there were some commissioners who really emphasized making sure that the lowest AMI,
Oh, I understand.
right? So I think maybe some of
It was
that.
the community impact piece that was
Right,
essentially
and
driving that.
Yeah, and so that may have been where it came from. But I think in terms of the way that we're actually fairly handily working through sort of fairness, transparency issues, that to have this in sync with what the home requirements are does make sense. And it does allow for those horrifying examples of being $2 over, not to mention the fact that actually there's plenty of people who are actually getting, on paper, doing better, but also, I mean, we're concerned with affordable housing throughout, right? And there's missing middle, and it's really expensive to live here, so that skews too. All of this is for me to say that I would agree that actually to put it to the home requirements, there's a symmetry there, it makes sense. There's not having to explain and say, well, it may have been because of that we now have this percentage. So I think that seems to be fair. then again, you know, I don't have a whole lot of weight in this right now, but.
The only other thing I should mention is that we're using the same scoring rubric to also score public facilities projects, so that makes it kind of complicated too.
Okay.
So,
That's useful info, yeah.
right.
Are those the actual questions that are asked on the application?
Yeah, we tried to really fine tune this to make it more parallel to the application. Some of them are almost verbatim and some of them are, you know, more broad, like looking at a budget. But we added that column, the third column, to look at specifically what question it relates to.
With number 9, will the project assist any special population? Good question. I'd like to actually see that. I'd like more information than a yes or a no. Like, how will the agency demonstrate? Because oftentimes, some agencies might eyeball something without, and I don't know if that's provided for in the reporting. It could be. Particularly with income, I know that there's some reporting requirements, but with special populations, I would just like to know how the agency gathers that information. I think I maybe had a similar question about the racial equity. We're asking more of a yes or no question. Does the project promote racial equality and inclusivity for marginalized populations? I'm gonna hope that an organization is gonna, you know, illustrate how they would do that, but technically they could say yes.
I think, if I remember right, the question is, it invites explanation, but I think that is, here's ironically the one place where it's like if an agency just does say yes, and they don't provide any explanation, my mind as a commissioner, I'm like, well, that doesn't suffice. I'm not good with just giving you a checklist of like, you fulfilled that, right? So that's where there is, I won't say subjectivity, but I will say judgment. This is somebody who is not perhaps gone through this process enough or is trying to simply answer a question without, they know what the question is, right? So that's my point, where that can be useful to have that kind of discretion.
What you said is important, where you're going to use your judgment. I think that's what I want to take away from this a little bit, is...
No, I know that. I'm just saying that this is the one place actually, I mean, because I know you've been clear, and I appreciate that. But I think that this is actually pointing to a place where that judgment actually is okay, to say, you wrote yes, as opposed to actually explaining and demonstrating what that equity, how you're demonstrating that, right? That makes your application weaker than somebody else's who does explain it.
It could. In my mind, what's going to happen is it'll be a question that's asked during the meeting where I have the agency execs come and respond, and for me, I just like to encourage that up front, that and I agree with you. I mean, it's a difference between an award-winning application or a grant and an A+ and a D-, But a lot of D-minuses have been funded, let me tell you. So I just want to make sure that we're getting the information up front.
I do have a question about the intent of the application. I'm not saying this will happen, but is it your intent to eliminate non-round numbers?
Say that again. Like the yes and no ones?
No, the people who are filling out this application, will they for each question be selecting 0, 5, 10, 15, or 20? I mean, the other application allowed for 3s and 11s and 17s, so on.
I changed it when we started looking at other cities' scoring criteria, as it seemed easier to have a flat number. There's one question in here that still uses range. It doesn't mean that we have to do it that way, but at the last meeting, I guess I heard commissioners say that they felt like it was subjective, so I don't know. It was just an idea to try to make it more straightforward.
Yeah.
I think that's good, to be more straightforward.
I think I spent a lot of time on the phone, really frustrated with, I created a little rubric within the rubric. You know, it's like, okay, if they did this, then this is the way I scored them in that range. I didn't like it.
Yeah.
I just would rather have a flat
Yeah.
number.
I think it'll produce some good discussions too. I mean, especially for number 9. I mean, if your only options here are 0 or 20, then could be make for interesting debate.
So in
I
number-
think that, I really appreciate the, number 3, where you get 0 points for it, where it says, the budget appears questionable and/or unreasonable, and the budget is substantially mathematically incorrect. Like they didn't use Excel.
In number 12, the criteria under that, maybe that's what I'm looking for in going back up to number 9, the project assists special populations. A says, yes, the project assists, but under 12, it's like the proposal clearly demonstrates the long-term efficient use of funding. So I think it's in that duplicate more of 12 in number 9.
You're looking for 3 tiers.
Yeah, and the same thing with the one that applied to racial equality and inclusivity. Same type of thing.
Where's that, Becky?
Oh, you do it there. So I think using those same kind of languages and putting it in the special needs, that A is that they clearly demonstrate. And Megan, I think that is exactly what we're talking about, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Number 12 came out of, I believe the question on the previous application was, does this project present a long-term solution to problems, right? That's the question that became number 12.
Similar, and just making sure that the project can serve out a period of affordability if it's a housing project, just making sure it's going to meet that requirement.
Okay. And ultimately, this has to end in a motion to approve this application, right?
I didn't hear you, sorry.
Our end point here is a motion to either approve or rework the application, right?
Right.
Do we have any more discussion on the application or any changes we would like to request to it? I don't think it's me.
That could be the train.
It's a train.
We're out of time.
I think it was the train.
I think it was the train.
Yeah.
Oh.
So it is possible we can make a motion, we can move to approve with the changes,
Right,
the suggested, yeah. Just making sure.
Are you making that motion?
Is there any more? Yeah, I'll move that we accept the changes with the, was it 2 suggested? Sorry.
I'm gonna need a recap on what the changes were, I think.
I move that we approve the amended application with the suggested changes we offered.
And what were the suggested changes? I think my mic's
Becky.
out.
For sure.
Mary Ann, help.
There was an addition, I think, of a 3rd tier to 9, right? That was one
That's
of them.
right.
Yeah.
A mid-tier to 9.
Yeah.
Were there any other changes other than number 9?
And I don't remember
was
any
another
other
one.
changes.
I got no business making a motion right now. So if that's the only change, then that we move to accept the amended application with the change to question 9 to a tiered response.
And I'll second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? And we also have the emerging aid to agencies application that we'll want to take a look at. I'll ask for any comments. I actually did not have any comments on this one. I had no issues.
This didn't change really from last year. We didn't make any major adjustments.
I know we are looking for project budget. Are we also looking for overall agency budget?
If it's an emergency, if it's for operational funds, don't you need the overall budget?
Well, I don't think it has to, I mean,
It's-
it could be, it could be, I guess it depends on what you define as operational funds, because program funds would be staff salaries in a specific program. To
That's
me.
what I consider operational funds.
Okay, so, but I would like to, I'd like to see an overall agency budget, and I'd like to see a project budget too, and that shouldn't be difficult for them to come up with.
It's not a bad idea. I mean, just considering the sort of, I think emerging aid agencies is just, we've taken a kind of pastoral role in some sense with the agencies. I mean, we have a Q&A round where sometimes we have some big problems with the applications, and then we workshop them. That information would probably be helpful.
Yep. I wouldn't mind seeing I don't think any of them are gonna have audits, but a 990 also, because I think that demonstrates, I'd like to see what kind of operating funds that they have, and if they actually have the financial capacity to do the programming. So I think that would be important. And I'd like to see their fund balance, if they have one. In fact, that's something I'm going to want to see from legacy agencies also, because I think that's running a strong organization is to have a fund balance.
Isn't that part of the United Way budget?
Well, not always looked at, and I think we should look at it, because there can be times when an agency has too much money, and then the question of if each year they're putting money into a fund balance, are we actually using our annual dollars to meet need in the community or increase an agency's fund balance? So, there's a fine line, and best practices in terms of how much an agency should have for a fund balance.
Right.
But even as a new organization, I think that these are things that they should be thinking about is at least some sort of, nest, albeit it might be small, but, I'd just like to see that. I think that goes with their financial competency to manage a program.
Just to give a little bit of, I don't know, historical perspective, there were certainly some agencies where, and certainly as we talked about, creating the emerging was to actually help some get that first start. So, I mean, again, I'm coming off of it, but I guess my hope would be that if in asking for this, because I do think it demonstrates seriousness, and I think, again, future looking for building a successful agency, but that the weighting of it in some ways, as you're looking at that, I know that there was one where, we gave them the minimum of $5,000 so they could get furniture to go into an office space. So they had they didn't have a nest egg, they didn't have a budget per se. That's why they were coming here to try and get furniture, right? So it's just one of those things, again.
I get it.
I'm not experienced as an agency, as somebody who runs an agency. But I just know that in the past, some of this was the intention at least was to help some actually get up on their feet rather than for them to demonstrate that they already are kind of like learning to walk.
That,
So
to me-
for what it's worth.
Yeah, no, I think, and that's a good point, but I think number 9, for me, answers that is that we're going to ask them to just describe sustainability. You know, how are they going to, because hopefully the city's money isn't the 100% of their budget. Right. And what are their plans? More so than we're writing applications for I'd like to, I'd at least like to have them say, we have a fundraising plan and these are the goals, that we intend to raise. This is our total budget, so this is how much money we have to raise.
Well, I agree with you, Megan, that it could be because they could get $5,000, right? Which, for somebody who's pretty new,
You got to start someplace, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we ask for their board of directors? Or their board of trustees or whatever?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
We haven't.
We haven't in the past.
I don't think it's a bad idea, to tell you the truth.
We can add also, we can request things and have like a requested field, or we can make it required as an attachment. So we could always ask for it and make it a not required field if there's things you're interested in, but don't
I
want to
think it's a
require.
good idea. I think there's a history of some nonprofits that start with maybe like a
Family
board
members.
of 3, which to me is a red flag.
Yeah.
Maybe their board of directors, and if they have a, profession like an accountant or.
Well, you're trying to maintain that level of no conflict with, you don't want you don't want friends of Becky in Becky's organization that are going to vote her way, but are going to vote for the good of the organization.
But otherwise, I think for an emerging agency, this looks fine.
So because we don't have that legacy application process done yet, this kind of goes back to that again. I'd kind of like to know why they got started. So that question is, number 6 is, why is the project needed? My question is that did they start because of some need that came out of the pandemic? And if they're still going, or, I guess I want a little bit of background in terms of, why they're still in existence and have they morphed into something else? Because I think that's going to become a big question, is some organizations who started during the pandemic, are those services still needed, or have they changed their services into something else? So I'd really like to see a little bit more in the history.
So are you proposing a rewrite of question 6 or an addition to question 6?
Yeah, I mean, is it wrong to also ask about duplication? Are they, are we asking a question about partners? I read so many applications, I can't remember what's in one and what's not anymore, but are we asking if they have developed partnerships?
Number 7 asks about how does the project fill a gap in the community? That kind of goes to what you were saying. I'm not sure about partnerships.
how are you defining partners if you ask the question? Like,
Coordinated entry is a partnership of agencies that, utilizes a lot of their strengths, individual strengths of each agency, maybe some technical type of issues, and comes up with a great product that every single agency benefits from, but more importantly, individuals in our community benefit from those. So it doesn't have to be a defined collaboration or anything like that, but we're partnering with, I was just looking at something, social media on Table to Table. And in the past 4 or 5 years, they certainly do a lot more special projects with agencies, where they might partner with a church or a small program to help feed kids after school or something like that. So it can be something like that, but I think that, I think that's important for them to become a part of that larger picture by partnering with, if they've been able to do something like that. I'd like to see that. If they're in existence for a year, they may not have been able to do anything like that.
that's kind of what I was thinking.
Yeah.
It's just that some of these things, I mean, I think that these are things that actually, like, an emerging agency, like, man, they should be just taking notes left and right to be like, oh, I should start doing that, or, but I don't know if they would. I'd almost think like a definition for them about, like, this is what we mean. It can be a church group. It can be a neighborhood association, just because it might be daunting to think, oh my God, like a coalition of agencies. I'm like, I don't do that. Or I don't even have, like, I'm working on getting referring agencies to, be able to do that work.
In
But
some cases, they're very much first getting used to the sort of 501c3 vocabulary
Yeah.
and sort of norms.
so that's
Yeah.
I love what you're saying, but I also think that it's like to define it for them so it's not daunting, and they're like, I'm already excluded because I don't do this.
Well,
I just think that, again, if it's $5,000 or up to $15,000, I think we're getting a little bit too much in the weeds for an agency that's only been in existence for 3 years.
yeah, it could be.
Yeah.
I am concerned about duplicating services, though. That's what I'm concerned about.
About what?
Duplicating services.
Well, yeah.
And it comes up in the
I think
discussion
if
of
the gap
applicants.
Oh, yeah.
is
I mean,
in
we've-
the community,
Yeah.
they need to answer that very well.
And we've even had people who have had great ideas, but they just were, it's like did not actually have a clear sense of execution, right? And it was like, love the idea, but even as an emerging agency, you're not ready yet. We don't know that, we don't have confidence that this money is going to actually do any good because you just don't have a plan, really. So I think that there's a lot of stuff that comes out in talking to them.
Well, I think that number 6 addressed that already, How is it,
6 and 7.
yeah, we addressed that indirectly. How do you fill the gap, so.
I think it's fine the way it is. And ask for the board of directors.
Do we want to ask
Full
for
budget.
agency budget?
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely.
yeah. I mean, I would think so.
And I want an attachment of a 990 at least. Like I said, I don't think they'll be doing audits, but everybody ought to be doing a 990, so.
Oh, yeah, they better be doing it. Unless it's under $50,000, then it's a
Yeah.
postcard.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we might be getting
Then it's a
postcards here.
postcard, because I'm
Is it 50? I thought it was 25.
No, it's 50.
50.
Is it? Okay.
I've had to fill them out the last couple of years. It's very easy for the postcard.
I'm the treasurer of another state organization, and
Well-
it's just a postcard.
How can we get what we're looking for, what I want then? Because I
A
just,
budget.
well, not a budget, but maybe year-end financials, a balance, a P&L or something. I think they're closing financials for the year of their last fiscal year, so.
I could make it general and just request some kind of financial records and put in parentheses 990, any kind of those examples,
Right.
just to see.
Yeah, I'd like to see, where they're getting their money from and, not specifically, but just to make sure that to me, that helps to create, in my mind, that vision about their stability enough to be able to allocate dollars to the organization. Well, I'll have lots of questions about the duplication during public comment time, so.
During the last time,
Huh?
during the last round, there were times where the commission requested additional information too, like additional records or other items, so that's a possibility.
I will have lots of
Yeah.
questions.
So our proposed change is a budget and, or it was an inclusive list that may include a budget and a 990. Was that the?
And a board of directors.
The board of directors.
And financials of some sort, yeah.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
I can fit all that in. That should work.
So I'll make a motion to approve so amended.
I'll move that we approve the emerging agency application with the amendments discussed.
I'll second then.
Okay.
I really only like to do so moved kind of things, but.
And all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And any opposed? All right. Number 8, Iowa City Council meeting updates. I have once again forgotten who volunteered. I don't know that anyone did, in fact.
I can't remember.
So I know, Becky, you did last time.
I did October.
Yeah. I
Yes, and I
didn't know
did
that
it-
anyone volunteered.
I don't think anybody did either.
Yeah.
I didn't, I know that.
I went to the one that was last week, so they
You're
did a
going to
lot
many
of
more
P and,
soon.
huh?
You're going to many more soon.
I know, I was taking notes. So they did a lot of approval of P and Z stuff. There was an explanation of fringe areas and basically sort of how to work with county to be able to sort of expand the anticipation of Iowa City growth and to how to create city-friendly growth in working with these fringe areas. And it made it to the next voting for the South District SMID, which I realize is of more interest to me than most of you, but it does have to do with actually being able to kind of rejuvenate the area in terms of building it up so that the neighborhood is a little bit more stable, so.
Well, we're going to have a presentation on the form-based at some point.
Yes, thank you, that was the other thing that they
Yeah.
passed that along, as a second vote.
It was very interesting. And I know it has a relative factor to what we do. I'm not totally clear on how, so I think it would be helpful for us to. They did have a work session also on the ARPA funds.
Yeah, I know.
So I know that the council's doing the majority of the work with that, but they are allocating some funding to nonprofit agencies. Will that process come through this commission or not?
Not that I know of. It's likely that the home funds, the home ARP funds will come through this commission
Okay,
when we solicit those applications, but it's still kind of unknown at this time.
okay.
I don't expect the city's allocation to come through the commission, but it's possible.
And we're not in session again until late January, so we may want to take 2 volunteers. How many city council meetings are happening before late January? 4?
There's,
I'm more than happy to watch them. Lame, I do anyway.
When are
so.
they?
And have the calendar with me.
I think there's one on the 14th. I think there's only one in December, if I
Okay, so there's
remember.
a
Yeah,
short
one in
schedule.
December, then there's
So Becky, I suppose you could, if you would be volunteering for the rest of 2021?
Sure, I can do that.
And
Yeah,
then,
there's one on the 30th, and then there's one in December,
Okay. And then I
On the
would,
30th, what?
November 30th.
Oh,
I'd be willing to volunteer for anything that is between,
You know, kick off 22 by
14th.
watching city
Are you
council
sure you
meetings.
want to? There's like a whole bunch of them.
are there?
They've got special,
Oh, what's all
all-
this?
they got all sorts of
Oh,
special.
these are work sessions.
There's like,
Sessions are interesting though, so.
yeah, that's where the interesting stuff is. No, but I think there's,
I'll volunteer for the January 18th meeting.
isn't that when you guys are supposed to meet? Oh, no, that's Tuesday. Never mind.
Oh, yeah, it's a couple
Never
days
mind.
before.
is there one on the 4th of January?
Yeah.
So I've got Becky written down for November 30th
Yep, and I'll do December too,
and December 14th.
yeah.
And I've got myself for January,
There is a one on the 4th.
oh, there is on the 4th.
Mm-hmm.
I'll volunteer for the 4th and the 18th.
Are they still having the budget work session on Saturday, the first Saturday of the
The
year?
8th.
Yeah. I'm probably going to go to that.
And then there's another work session on Wednesday, the 12th.
Of what, December?
No, January.
Is it the same, is it,
So there's Saturday, the 8th at 8 a.m., and then there's one Wednesday, the 12th at 3 p.m.
I'll look and see how they're different.
Yeah,
That's the
I don't know.
budget?
Those are both budget.
Are you going to go to both of those?
Oh, if the Saturday, if the Wednesday one's not at 8 in the morning, I might choose, if it's the same topic.
Yeah, I don't know.
I really don't do meetings the first week in the new year, so I think there should be a law.
I'll do the Wednesday at 3.
Yeah, if that's the same, if it's, the ones I went to, haven't gone for a couple of years, really great if you want to understand the city budget.
Why, yeah,
Very, very helpful.
yeah.
So some of the.
So we didn't decide, okay.
Some of the ARPA allocations that I've seen happen include a $50,000 to, I'm assuming agencies that are involved in the Agency Impact Council for a needs assessment. If that actually happens, can we get a presentation from the Agency Impact Council in terms of how they're going to do that? And I think it might be a good idea for this, somebody from this group to monitor that process. Because the needs assessment will be, it'll be probably a more in-depth needs assessment that's been done in a long, long time. And I think they plan on hiring a professional group as a consultant to do it, so. And I've seen it as a proposed funding option, so it looks like it's going to get funded.
And this is one of the early January meetings where this is going to be.
I'm not sure what the timeline is, Megan. I don't know if you have any idea when they're going to actually do the final vote on the ARPA funds.
I don't, and I know that at least in the work session, their focus was primarily on, actually a lot of it was emergency housing programs, and, oh God, there was
Well, the
4,
things
but
that
it
they-
really had to do with housing as far, pardon?
I think the things that they could work with the county on, the larger.
Yeah,
yes.
it was sort of they were trying to figure out which things they should partner on, what shouldn't, where there was crossover, you're absolutely right. As far as how the city then is going to themselves distribute the rest of their monies, I haven't been at those meetings.
I just think it'd be helpful, because I think that if out of this comes a really great community needs assessment, informing us of, what kinds of services are critical, that could have a lot to do with how we fund in the future. So I think it'd be helpful for us to monitor that in some way. And I think the agencies would be open to that too. It's not done in secret or anything. It's being paid for by the city, so.
Well, and I know Maria and V both had kind of a, if not a standing meeting with them, had met with them, to have something of a relationship, to know what they're.
Yeah, I can
So-
reach out to Maria on this. Be something I can do.
Yeah.
I can do that later this week. Let's see, we're on to number 9. Looks like we have a staff memo.
Yes, so at the last meeting, we got a request for a presentation about the South District Form-Based Code, which was approved by council this week. The planning and zoning staff have a meeting the same night on Thursday nights as well, so it's kind of challenging to get a staff to present. But Ann Russett did provide a memo about the code changes for you guys to review. And you could reach out to her, and also the presentations that they've given to council and planning and zoning commission are online if you guys were interested in reviewing those. If there's a strong interest for a presentation, we can figure something out. But their council, the presentations they've already given to those other entities are available online. I don't know a ton about it, so I'm not the expert on this, so if you have questions, I would reach out to Ann, or we can direct you to Ann.
This was a pretty helpful memo. It's a good memo.
Kind of exciting, to see what's happening, so I like it a lot. I think this is so clumsy how I'm gonna say it, but to me, it's, that buildings are it might all take a look of maybe of 1900s, like you might have a house that there's a retail shop in, it looks like a home, it's in a neighborhood, so it creates these smaller, walkable neighborhoods, I think. So it's very exciting, but it's years. This doesn't get proposed in 2023 and finished in 2028. It could take 20 or 30 years for it
Well,
to be.
and this is just the zoning, so it's like up to a developer to actually
Yeah.
take the reins and go with it. And I know that the builders are not necessarily immediately thrilled with it because they would rather just be able to build, but it's sort of like, it's the same way about the transparency. It's like everything is up front in this form-based code, what you need to do, and it's there, so there's not going to be this sort of like back and forth and that type of a thing. So ultimately, there's clarity. So anyway, I think it's exciting because also it's livable. It's like there's some people who, and I know we want to get out of here, but there's some people who live over by True Blood who they have a covenant within their, I don't know if they're part of an HOA or whatever, but they're concerned that their views are going to get all messed up. And it was like, they're not going to, like affordability and affordable housing and multiplexes, we're not talking about high rises. It's like it is all put in. It was like, if you just read the memo, go to the council meetings, see what the planners, go to any of the meetings that the people who wrote the code actually like proposed and were showing. It's like, it's very walkable and neighborhood-like. So I think it's a nice step forward.
Kind of reminded me a little bit of like the new Bohemia District flavor in Cedar Rapids, where you'll see homes that clearly look like, family of 4 or 6 or 8 grew up there, but now it's more of a retail center in the midst of this, very diverse, evolving neighborhood. So I thought it was really cool.
We'll entertain any motions anyone might make for adjournment.
I have just a couple quick updates, really
I
quick.
thought you were finished.
I'll be really
Sorry.
fast, I promise. Next meeting's in January, so don't show up in December. No one will be here. We'll have project presentations. We're going to open the FY23 funding round in December on the 29th, and it will be open until January 31st. So we're going to be diving right back into the process all over again. Teresa's vacancy is posted, so council will do an appointment for the next HCDC member in December. And then, last but not least, thank you, Megan, for all your time on the commission. I know I wasn't here the whole time, but it's been appreciated.
Yeah, well, I truly have loved being part of this, and it kind of whet my appetite to do more. And like, you have a direct pipeline to, I'd love to, know what's going on. I know that we get all the minutes, or I'm not there yet, but the minutes are available to council and all of that. But, thoughts, concerns, whatever.
We'll be watching you every meeting.
I know that. I'm like, no pressure.
Well, come back anytime
Yeah.
for a visit, I mean.
I think the thing that's going to, honestly, at the moment, that'll be hard is like, I've got to watch, thank God for masks, because, man, I've been watching like how the poker face thing works, because I don't have it, so.
You'll be moving on to a much larger YouTube audience, I think. I don't know that our audience is very big. But
thank you, guys. This is awesome. I mean, you guys are awesome. I learned so much from you.
I think we've got our motion.